I know you'll do it real easy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Please sit down. That's very kind. Please sit down. Pretty, thank you very much for that warm welcome. Thank you all for being here on a Friday night. It speaks volumes about your commitment to making America great again, that you are here instead of at the movies or some other typical family pastime on a Friday night. And I want you to know how much I appreciate it, and I know the President appreciates it. I think that this is the week in which the Trump presidency turned the corner. The U.S. Supreme Court upheld the president's travel ban from certain Middle Eastern countries. Let's be very clear. What the president proposed was a temporary freeze in immigration from countries with a high concentration of terrorists. Not a permanent ban on travel from those countries, but a temporary freeze until we can put in place a more comprehensive immigration system that allows us to vet and evaluate every person who applies to come here. Under the current regulations, it is not allowed for the U.S. Immigration Service to look at the social media postings of an applicant. This defies common sense. If you are saying on your Facebook tweet, Ali Akbar, kill all the Jews, I don't want you in the United States. I think it is just common sense, not bigotry, not prejudice, not racism, but common sense that we tighten the control at our borders and that we put in place an immigration system that works. That's all Donald Trump has proposed. But his proposal has been mischaracterized, and I think unfairly characterized by two federal judges. Yet, an important element of his platform has now been realized. We have moved one step closer to sealing our borders and putting in place a more comprehensive and better immigration system. Once again, the establishment politicians and the two-party elitist duopoly that has run the country into the ground said that he could not succeed, but he has succeeded. The stock market is soaring. We've now moved beyond the point where we just saw consumer confidence early in the Trump administration to seeing real definitive uptick in the number of jobs created. There is, I think, unreported by the mainstream media, a comprehensive effort to cut regulation that is holding us back from job creation. And when the liberals in the mainstream media say that Donald Trump's objective is to undo everything Barack Obama did, they're absolutely right, and we will. Let's be very clear. The nomination and the election of Donald Trump is the hostile takeover of the Republican Party as we knew it. And now the Republican Party will be remade in Donald Trump's image, a party of working people, a party of the middle class, a party of common sense, no longer the party of Wall Street or the party of K Street, no longer a party of the special interests and the Romneys and the Bushes who talk a good game when it comes to cutting federal spending, or talk a good game about controlling the size of government, or talk a good game about returning power to the people, but who, when they get in office, emulate the Democrats. I mean, it is a very sad truth because I have a sentimental attachment to the old Republican Party, the Republican Party of Barry Goldwater, the Republican Party of small government, of minimal regulation, of low taxation, of a strong national defense as a deterrent, not a neocon-based foreign policy of going around the globe looking for trouble, looking for foreign wars where our inherent national interest is not clear. So Donald Trump is not an isolationist. He understands that there are people around the world, ISIS, for example, who don't wish us well, who would destroy our form of life and our democracy. But he also recognizes that ISIS is a vestige of a interventionist foreign policy. It's a loose thread left by the Bushes and the Clintons because of, the Bushes, the Clintons, and the Obamas because of the failed foreign policy that all three of them embraced. It was a policy of war first and ask questions later. Now, many of you cannot help to have seen on television the continuing mainstream media insistence that the Russians interfered in the 2016 election. And the heads of the various intelligence services just repeat this over and over like robots, like they've all gotten the same talking point memo. The problem is that they have put forward for the American people no proof whatsoever, no evidence whatsoever, and now we even have, thanks to my friend James O'Keefe, Van Jones caught flat-footed, bald-faced, admitting that the whole Russian narrative is without substance. This is a narrative invented by John Podesta, the chairman of Hillary's campaign, to distract from the fact that there was a candidate for president in bed with the Russians. There was a candidate for president whose inner circle was making millions of dollars from the oligarchs surrounding Vladimir Putin. I'm talking about John and Tony Podesta and Bill and Hillary Clinton, who were lining their pockets thanks to the largesse of Putin's Kremlin and his coterie of oligarch buddies. There's the uranium deal, the gas deal, the bank deal. That's what I meant when I said John Podesta's time in the barrel would come. Quite simply, that the scrutiny of his business activities would show who was and was not in bed with the Russians. Bill and Hillary both taking enormous speaking fees from entities close to the Russians. It's funny, this fellow Mike Kelly with the Bergen Record, a New Jersey newspaper, writes about 2 weeks ago that I claimed that the Clintons were in bed with Putin, but I put forward no evidence. He better read From Russia with Love by Peter Schweitzer, or he can actually just go to the Clintons' War on Women, and all the documentation is right there. Can this mainstream media elitist reporter not read? Now, I have agreed to testify on July 24th for the House, I like to call it the House Non-Intelligence Committee, where I am going to have to correct the misinformation and the disinformation and the falsehoods put forward by individual members of that committee. They are running out of string. They have turned up nothing. We do have some scandals in this country that do need exploration. We learned 2 weeks ago that the Obama administration was chastised by the super secret FISA court for widespread surveillance of American citizens in violation of our Constitution. This is a serious crime, far more serious than Watergate, far more serious than any allegations of Russian collusion. Valerie Jarrett, Susan Rice, Mr. Clapper, Mr. Rogers, so many others in the deep state apparatus. And yes, I want to know, what did the president know and when did he know it? It's time for the Justice Department of the Trump administration to turn the table on the president's critics and explore a crime for which we have evidence, and that is the wholesale surveillance of as many as 20 million American citizens. It's chilling. Yesterday, I read a piece where Susan Rice said that criticism of her for utilizing surveillance data from the intelligence services for political reasons against Donald Trump and his associates, that the criticism of her is based in gender and race because she's a woman and an African American. Please give me a break. It's based in you're breaking the law, Susan, and you being accountable just like everyone else. What was the great lesson of Watergate that they told us over and over again? It was that no person is above the law. Well, what then of Hillary Clinton and her email scandal? We now know, incredibly, that the FBI director, James Comey, received a memo that was intercepted by the FBI that alleged that the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, assured associates of Hillary Clinton that she would not look very deeply into the email scandal. Although we now know that this memo was a counterfeit, was a forgery, we also know that Mr. Comey believed that it was true. And from his testimony, we know that Mr. Comey said the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, leaned on him publicly to describe the Clinton email matter as a matter rather than an investigation. So in other words, Mr. Comey became aware of an obstruction of justice, or what he believed was an obstruction of justice, and rather than report that as an officer of the court, he abetted it. He facilitated it. It would explain why his long statement outlined all the transgressions and illegal actions of Hillary, but ended up with the conclusion that she would not be prosecuted. How can Mr. Comey have any credibility now after this startling revelation? This story comes from the Washington Post, not from Stone Cold Truth, not from Infowars.com, not from Breitbart, but from the heart of the mainstream media. And now we have Mr. Mueller, the special prosecutor, or I think the real name is special counsel. And we learned that he was coaching Mr. Comey on his testimony. That is an egregious conflict. I'm not sure why we have a special counsel. Special counsels are usually appointed when we've established that there is a crime. We've still not established any crime here. So now the Democrats and the mainstream media, having come up empty-handed with Russia, or the claim of Russian collusion, move on to whether the president leaned on Mr. Comey to fix the investigation into General Flynn, which he did not. There's a big difference between telling somebody to wrap it up and telling somebody to fix it, first of all. Secondarily, in a showdown between the President of the United States and Mr. Comey as to who we should believe, I can tell you who I believe. See, Mr. Comey has worked for both the Bushes and the Clintons as a cleanup man. He was on the Whitewater investigation staff. You remember that? That was the shady real estate development in which Bill and Hillary took out $890,000, which paid for the TV commercials for Bill's gubernatorial comeback in Arkansas. Of course, nobody was charged. Then Mr. Comey was the government's prosecutor in the Sandy Berger affair. You remember that one. That's where Bill Clinton's national security advisor, Sandy Berger, gets into the National Archives, talks a docent into looking the other way, leaving the room, stuffs classified documents down the front of his pants, documents that showed that Bill Clinton could have killed Osama bin Laden but didn't. He gets caught. Of course, with Mr. Comey in the prosecutor's chair, nobody was prosecuted. Then there's the Mark Rich member. Remember Mark Rich? He was an international fugitive from justice. And he gave, I believe it was, as much as $3 million to the Clinton Foundation, essentially buying a pardon. And his pardon did not go through the natural level or process. It was put in front of the president at the last minute. And it became valid. Now, Mr. Comey was the actual prosecutor in the original Mark Rich case, so he understood the crime, yet under his prosecution, nobody was prosecuted in that matter either. So the history of Mr. Comey carrying water for the Clintons is established. And Mr. Mueller, as the FBI director, carried a uranium sample to Russia on behalf of Mrs. Clinton. So we have seen now that Mr. Comey, Mr. Mueller, and presumably Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, who also has served the Bushes and the Clintons, well, these guys are the three amigos. And this cake is baked, ladies and gentlemen. They intend to bring a charge against our president despite a total lack of evidence, despite the proof of a crime, in an effort to further destabilize his presidency and to delegitimize his presidency. That's why I urge the president to urge the Attorney General to forget about marijuana and spend your time prosecuting the Clintons and the Obamas. The Clinton Foundation is not a charity, it's a slush fund for grifters. It's a vehicle for the facilitation of multi-million-dollar bribes in which public policy decisions at the Clinton State Department were for sale to the highest bidder. And although the Clinton Foundation and Hillary Clinton agreed with the president not to accept certain contributions or to inform the Obama administration when they were contemplating same, they did nothing of the kind. Let's face it, Bill and Hillary Clinton would steal a hot stove. They are truly the penicillin-resistant syphilis of the American body politic. But no person is above the law, and that is why I say, lock her up. Thank you. On the way here from Fort Lauderdale, I flew in last night from Romania. I was in Romania and Hungary and then later in Turkey, talking to government officials who are deeply concerned about the activities of George Soros and his efforts to subvert legitimate democracies, to foment violence and upheaval and overturn the democratically elected governments of a number of Eastern European nations. We know that he paid for the violence at Donald Trump's rallies. We know that he has paid people who have advocated the assassination of our president a federal crime. One wonders how long it will be before this criminal is apprehended, charged, and tried. On the way here, I spoke to my friend Alex Jones. And I did a brief bit by phone for InfoWars evening broadcast, in which we talked about the latest developments on InfoWars.com. As I think most of you know, the mainstream media has gone insane today because finally, getting sick of being called mentally ill, a dictator, and worse by Joe and Mika, the president finally returned fire. You see, they're not used to that. They're used to politically correct politicians who turn the other cheek because they're all really in the same club. The sad truth is, Joe Scarborough thought that he should be the Republican candidate for president in 2016. Thought that he should be Donald Trump's vice presidential running mate, and has never been able to get over the fact that the American people elected Donald Trump instead of, yes, Joe Scarborough. And we now know that it was the president's son-in-law, I guess, who made it clear that the president's back. Now, Joe Scarborough says that he was threatened with blackmail. I'd like to see the texts and the emails or some other proof of that before I jump to the conclusion that he's telling the truth. But what we have seen in the last week, where CNN was forced to admit that their entire story on Donald Trump and the Russian investment fund was a falsehood, was a fraud. They're now being sued by my friend Anthony Scaramucci for $100 million. They told us that several CNN executives resigned. We now know in truth they were fired. But it doesn't change the fact that CNN has ceased to be a news organization, and now it's a propaganda front for anybody and anything that is anti-Trump. I mean, when I see a panel of David Axelrod, Robbie Mook, and 2 or 3 other liberals talking about my testimony, I guess that's their idea of balance. Van Jones, yeah, exactly.
Anna Navarro.
Alex Jones's cousin Van, as I like to call him. Anna Navarro, don't get me started. So we are seeing, I think, an exciting thing where the mainstream media is beginning to melt down. They cannot get over the stunning election of my friend Donald Trump. They cannot get over the fact that we are now going to stand up for America, put America first, that we're rejecting the globalist agenda for an American agenda. That Donald Trump is committed to tax reform to bring us a vibrant, pro-growth economy, one that leaves no one behind. Because in the words of John Kennedy, a rising tide lifts all boats. And the elites of both parties, and yes, that includes the Republicans, they just can't stand it. It's fun to watch. So, what is their plan? I can tell you what it is, and it's chilling. You see, I believe Donald Trump was only able to win because of the existence of a vibrant, robust alternative media. 2016 was the year in which the mainstream media, CBS, ABC, NBC, and then later Fox and CNN, lost their monopoly on the dissemination of political information. Because of the technological advance of millions of Americans, in fact now a majority, getting their information through a handheld or other computer device, and thus through the internet, it has opened the door to alternative media like never before. If you don't like what CNN reports, you can go elsewhere. You can go to InfoWars, you can go to Breitbart, you can go to Daily News. So now what's happening is the Silicon Valley giants, Twitter, Facebook, Yahoo, Amazon, Google particularly, they're beginning to manipulate their algorithms and play a dozen other computer tricks to limit our reach. They are deciding, first of all, as the arbiters of what's true and what isn't, to label certain things that are fake news which is ironic because they're the purveyors of fake news, and a dozen other clever tricks in which they attempt to put the toothpaste back in the tube. They attempt to return to the days when only they had a voice. This is censorship. This is the scourge of the Stalins. Well, I hate to mention Hitler in a speech, because when you do, you're usually losing the argument. But it is the scourge of dictators, and it proves that the left can no longer compete on the battlefield of ideas and facts and logic, and therefore unable to argue their point of view, they resort to censorship. This is the most important battle of our day. I urge you to go to Free Our Internet, I think it's freeourinternet.com, and get tuned into this fight, because it is the most important fight that I think we face. See, I'm not for censorship of any kind. I don't care how liberal you may be. I don't care how far out of the mainstream, right or left. Everyone deserves a voice. Everyone deserves an opinion. I have great confidence in the American people. I have great confidence in the individual consumer, in this case, the individual voter or the individual reader, to sort out for themselves what they choose to believe and what they choose not to believe. I think that censorship is a slippery slope. One of the questions that I want to straighten out when I speak and testify on the 24th is the question of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. Mr. Assange is a journalist. Mr. Assange, yes, he has published information that has been purloined, that has been stolen. How does that make him different than the New York Times in the Pentagon Papers case, in which the courts ruled that the Times had the right to publish that information? Now, I don't believe the intelligence service's assessment that Mr. Assange is a Russian asset. It's funny how so many on the left loved it when Assange was publishing leaks from the Bush administration, but now have decided that he is a negative influence. We're going to straighten that out. Then, of course, there's the question, the charge by John Podesta that I knew about the hacking of his email in advance. No, I knew he had shady business dealings in Eastern Europe with the Russian oligarchs connected to Vladimir Putin, but I had no advanced knowledge of the hacking of his email. I never said that it would be hacked. I never predicted it would be hacked. Those words never came from my mouth. So I look forward to straightening out the record. It is a really disturbing thing to read that the Trump administration is considering indicting Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. I'm having a very hard time figuring out what his crime is. It's a slippery slope. Who will be indicted next? The New York Times, the Washington Post, the Tampa Tribune? I think when you start working against and challenging the free speech rights and the free press rights of journalists, that is a slippery slope. Yes, the mainstream media often makes me angry in their coverage, but I don't advocate their censorship. I don't advocate that they be prosecuted for their point of view. So it is a perilous time. We are faced with challenges in Iran. We're faced with challenges in North Korea. We are faced with challenges from the Chinese. But the opposition to Donald Trump comes largely from the fact that he does not favor war over Syria. Believe me, Donald Trump has no illusions about the evil of the Russian gulag, no illusions about the corruptness and evil of the Russian system, a system that oppresses Christians and Jews and gays and other tribesmen. He has no illusions whatsoever about Vladimir Putin, in my opinion. But if one examines the situation in Syria, on the one hand you have Assad, who finances Hezbollah, who finances Hamas, propped up by the Russians, and on the other side you have 1,000 Islamic sub-terrorist groups, the largest of which I think is ISIS, propped up by the Saudis. Is this war worth a drop of American blood? Is it worth a single borrowed American dollar? Donald Trump, like my mentor, Richard Nixon, favors détente over war. He would like to try to sit down and see if we can reach some agreement with both the Russians and the Chinese to live in peace as an alternative to thermonuclear war. Perhaps he will be unsuccessful, but at least he will try. And I have no doubt that the deep state and the intelligence services and the defense industry and the Pentagon was promised the expansion of the proxy war in Syria by Hillary Clinton, and thus their implacable opposition to Donald Trump. And we have seen, since the election, a series of illegal government leaks from the intelligence services to the media, all of which violate the law, in which we have sought to plant disinformation. On January 20th, the New York Times, page 1, in a story that's headlined, "Wiretapped Data Utilized in Probe of Trump Associates," it claimed that the intelligence services informed the New York Times, on a background basis of course, that they were in possession of emails, records of financial transactions, and then on the 31st they add transcripts of telephone intercepts that proved collusion between Trump associates and the Russians. That was January. It's now virtually July. Where are they? They don't exist. That's the sad truth. Even Mr. Comey in his testimony pointed out that their story of the 14th, which is essentially a recycle of the story, or a precursor to the story, February 14th, a recycle of the story first published on the 20th, is incorrect. Dianne Feinstein, the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, admits no real evidence of Russian interference in the election. Sure, we have a memo between Boris and Ivan talking about it, but I could talk about winning the PGA too. Doesn't mean I'm going to do it. So, I am delighted to be with you tonight. I'm delighted with your support for the president. I know he appreciates it. I am going to be signing copies of my book, The Making of the President 2016. This book, which I think you will enjoy, is the definitive insider's account of how Donald Trump pulled the greatest political upset in American presidential history. We also have copies of my other books available: the Clinton's War on Women, the Bush crime family, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, the Case Against LBJ, which is a New York Times bestseller and a book that I am most proud of. Every single interview I do, it seems that somebody asks me about being a conspiracy theorist. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I'm a conspiracy realist. In my conclusions, I simply go where the facts lead. I've never made any assertion that I don't think is documented with facts. I know this: the government rarely tells you the truth, and they almost never tell you the entire truth. And therefore, it is good to be skeptical. It is good to be self-educated about the facts. The government tells us that the United States was attacked by the North Vietnamese in the Gulf of Tonkin, and that was the excuse they gave us for the war. That turned out to be a lie. I don't think anybody disputes that today. So why would they not lie about other things, whether it is weapons of mass destruction? 17 intelligence agencies said that Saddam Hussein had these weapons. They're the same 17 who tell us that there was Russian interference in this election. They told us that there was no torture going on at the Abu Ghraib prison. That was false too. So how many times do we have to swallow disinformation before we question what we're being told? I think it is healthy, not unhealthy. I think it is the responsibility of every citizen to reach their own conclusions on the basis of their own research. The internet now makes that possible. And therefore, I urge you in the fight against censorship to become an army of one. If you have a Twitter feed, if you have a Facebook feed, if you're on Instagram or even Snapchat, well, you have a forum. And when you see a story that you think is important, a story that persuades you, whether it's stonecoldtruth.com or stonezone.com or infowars.com or Breitbart or Town Hall or the New York Times or the Miami Herald, which had an excellent story on the Obama overreach on surveillance of American citizens. Well, then retweet that, repost that link. It's important. I'm going to thank you now and move to signing books. I will take 5 questions. If somebody will bring me a tissue or a paper towel, I would appreciate it. Like my mentor, Mr. Nixon, I'm a sweater.
Whoever does it gets a free shirt. So whoever's going to grab it, right there. Are you going to get the shirt or a question?
A question.
Great. So first question.
Okay.
Okay.
Hi. So first of all, it's an honor to get to speak to you.
Okay.
And
Yes.
thank you so much for taking the time to visit the Tampa Bay area and to see people who care about freedom and human rights and the future of our country. One thing that I've noticed lately that Alex Jones has talked about a little bit, and you may have spoken about, but there's this narrative now that they're trying to create at the White House, for example, with Nikki Haley going to the UN. And I describe it as like a pre-crime narrative, which is where they're trying to say that if there is an attack, right? Oh, Syria did it. So let's all get everybody, ready for this brainwashing or whatever. Why is President Trump allowing these people to do that? Why isn't he firing people who are trying to further a regime change and preemptive war? Like you said, we had WMD issues before, which were false. I mean, how many times, how many countries do we have to invade? So this is just another symptom of the same globalist takeover. So why is he not firing these people? Nikki Haley should be fired. Heather, whatever her last name is, the State Department should be fired for promoting war through, again, a pre-crime narrative. We're going to start destroying countries based on, assumptions.
I have serious questions about whether Assad gassed his own people, provocation for the attack on the country.
Seymour Hersh says otherwise.
I realize that, but Seymour is sometimes wrong. That.
Get wrong and kill lots of people. I'm just saying.
In any event, what I have found in government politics is that people rarely do things that are not in their best interest. Assad had claimed in 2013 that he had given up his chemical weapons, and vouching for him are his Russian patrons. Why would he embarrass them? Frankly, he has had the upper hand in the war, and I think he had the rebels on the run. Another reason why I doubt that he would take these steps. There's an enormous amount of research to the contrary. So I agree with you on the preemptive nature. There are those in the deep state, those of the neocon tradition who would like Syria to be the next Libya. How did that work out? Not well. Not well. So it's an excellent question. Nikki Haley seems to be out of step with the president's foreign policy. I was surprised by her appointment. And I've thought all along that the greatest danger to the Trump administration would come not from liberal Democrats, you know where they stand, but from establishment Republicans.
All right, we're going to move on to the next question.
Thank you.
Gentleman right there, have a runner?
Yes, sir.
Or you can project.
I'm fine. What do you consider the most important step that Donald Trump can take to ensure a win in the next election?
Very simple. He should direct the Attorney General for Antitrust to examine the activities of Twitter, Facebook, Google, et al. Because I believe they are illegal. I believe they're anti-competitive. And with a robust and vibrant and free alternative media, I believe that he will be reelected. If we have to count on the 3 networks and the 2 cable news networks to tell us what's going on, I think reelection will be very, very difficult, regardless of the facts. Secondarily, I think the president has to get his tax reform package passed, and it has to include a cut in the corporate tax rate below that of China, Japan, Mexico. I think that in itself would bring an influx of capital and job creation back into the United States. I think we need to pursue the plan that the president laid out for inversion, for bringing vast sums back onshore for fair taxation and to go to work here. I think that we do need, as John Kennedy and Ronald Reagan both thought and implemented, an across-the-board tax cut, because people and companies know better how to spend their money than the government does. And I think a revitalized economy is the key to re-election. A revitalized economy, closing our borders and implementing a better immigration system, redoing the international trade deals that have sucked the jobs out of America, and having a free, vibrant alternative media so people can read about these things. Those are the keys to re-election, in my opinion.
Marshall, go ahead.
Well, thank you for coming here, Roger. I think you're incredible. I mean, I'm a huge fan of yours. But recently, I was featured in Jacob Ingles' Central Florida Post, and I was also interviewed by Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly before he was let go. And I had a confrontation with one of my professors who, unfortunately, she was under FBI investigation at one point in time for terrorism links. And she protected a student who said it was okay to chop the heads off of gays and lesbians and cut the hands off of thieves and to stone other people. I thought that was really a horrible thing that she protected with one of her students. And so I protested against that, and I was suspended from my university. And now I've been reinstated, and she's been fired. But is there anything that President Trump can do, or in your mind, that anything he should do to protect students like me who are in that same situation, who are vulnerable conservatives or libertarians, who are just trying to fend for themselves in the college environment and express their opinions?
Well, the most disappointing thing about your situation was the way that the Orlando Sentinel immediately declared the entire story fake news. That was very disconcerting, because the facts are what the facts are. I congratulate you on being reinstated. The campuses are, yes. I mean, the campuses are ground zero in the fight over free speech. And again, I think everybody, Black Lives Matter, the most radical groups should have a voice. Everybody should be allowed to speak. But the idea that some people need to be silenced, that's un-American at its root. So I think the president can provide leadership on these issues and continue to point out not only the need to oppose censorship, but the need to denounce political correctness when it abridges the First Amendment rights of people like you.
All right, next question. Gentleman in the yellow hat right there, Zoltan.
Where's Wayne Maxton and will Mike Lynn be back? And speaking at the mayor's conference in Miami last week?
I have yet to see or know about a crime related to the Russians by General Flynn. It appears to me that he may be guilty of stupidity in taking a gratuity from Russian television, something I would not have done. But that is not an illegal act, it's a question of judgment. Even in the question of his lobbying for the Turks, he did register with the clerk of the House, but he failed to register with the State Department. So an argument could be made that he wasn't seeking to hide anything. The prosecution on that matter is rare, but again, it has nothing to do with the Russians. I think the president believes that he moved prematurely. Some evidence that he regrets firing General Flynn, who I think is a patriot. Now, I want to see more regarding whether he had inappropriate contacts with the Russians, but based on what I know, I'm not seeing the crime, just not seeing it. And therefore, while I think it is unlikely that he would be back, I do think he has been unfairly maligned based on what we know so far.
Someone in the back will run the mic. This gentleman in the blue shirt.
Thank you. So I read on your, I think it was on your Twitter that you thought the president should fire Mueller as special counsel. I think there's more than a few people in here who agree that that's a good idea. But if he did and fired Rod Rosenstein, how would that play out? And would that be political suicide? What would he have to do to make that work and turn the tables around?
I think that he would have to dismiss them, at the same time direct the Attorney General or the Deputy Attorney General, whoever was next in line, since the Attorney General's recused himself, to appoint a new special prosecutor who had no bias. The intertwining careers of Comey and Mueller, and the fact that Mr. Mueller auditioned for the job of FBI director after Mr. Comey was dismissed, I think creates a second conflict of interest that would make it better for him to step aside. I don't think the president could dismiss both of them, period. I think that the matter does need to be resolved, but I would like to see a special counsel who had no bias, who was not a personal friend of Mr. Comey, whose veracity the special counsel must weigh.
Last question, better make it a good one. All right, this gentleman right here, I'm coming at you at the moment. All right, there you go.
Thank you, Roger. I love your piece with InfoWars yesterday on. You know, and I can't wait to watch InfoWars with you every night.
Thank you.
One of the things that upsets me, I follow the DNC problem, not turning over the computers, okay? And I believe there is a huge, huge bunch of information that will, that's the reason why the Russian scenario came forward to sidestep the problem that they've been doing since their pact, okay, which was inside, I believe, in whoever. What pressure can we put on, or what pressure should our president, Trump, be able to put on that situation to release those computers? And we got many more information that's coming out. There was two brothers that actually stole many, many computers, and nothing's being done about it. It's sitting in the Washington, D.C. Police Department right now. What do you think?
Well, it seems to me that the appropriate people to pursuing the Democratic National Committee servers, which they refused to let the FBI examine, and hired an intermediary, a private company, CrowdStrike, which tells us, again, without any proof, that they were hacked by the Russians. Why won't they let government investigators examine those servers? But that should fall to the majority Republicans on the House and Senate Intelligence Committee. They have the charter and the authority to examine that material. Why they have not subpoenaed it, I don't know. I think it would be an appropriate act by both committees, but they seem to be drowning in phony Russian allegations. I gotta tell you the truth, I've stopped eating Russian dressing on my salads. I'm not drinking Russian vodka anymore, because God knows what they might say. So, comrades, I mean friends. All right, so I thank you all. I ask you to, we have just now kind of relaunched stonezone.com. You can go there for archival matters plus a lot of the current news coverage. I am going to be doing a nightly show at InfoWars shortly. We'll be unveiling that. So hopefully allow me to stay home in the Sunshine State a little bit more than I'm able to do today because the travel is debilitating. But I'm very proud of you. I'm proud of the role you played in formulating the greatest political upset in American history.
Yeah.
As I examine the 2016 election, and I do this in my book, I noticed a number of parallels between this election and the 1948 election, which I think up till now would be considered the greatest upset in American history. In that race, the pollsters and the mainstream media of the day told the incumbent Harry Truman, who had become president upon the death of Franklin Roosevelt, that he could not win. The polls showed that he could not win. His opponent, Governor Tom Dewey, was aloof, arrogant, overconfident, and set a very leisurely campaign pace. And Harry Truman got on a train in Washington and he headed west. And as he headed west, he stopped at towns, major and minor. People would group around, including the local media of the day, the press. And he laced into the Republicans, he laced into his opponent, he laced into the do-nothing 89th Congress. And by the time his train got to California, the crowds were enormous. And he carried California, even though Tom Dewey's running mate was the popular governor of California, Earl Warren. And he upset Governor Dewey. And while Harry Truman was barnstorming across America, Governor Dewey was in his suite at the Roosevelt Hotel in Manhattan, carefully picking out his cabinet. And then I saw the parallels, because in the closing 2 weeks, Donald Trump existed on 2 and 3 hours of sleep a night, barnstorming into Democratic strongholds in Wisconsin, Michigan, Western Pennsylvania, Ohio, and yes, Florida. And Hillary Clinton? Oh, she was in Chappaqua, in her pajamas, looking at the swatches of fabric, picking out the material for the Oval Office curtains. And then I began to realize that in many ways, Hillary Clinton was a lot like Governor Dewey. Aloof, cold, overconfident, arrogant. In fact, Hillary Clinton was Tom Dewey without the mustache. Our candidate, Donald Trump, is and will be always remembered as a closer. He put forward what I believe to be a virtually superhuman physical effort those last 2 weeks that made a real difference. And when you examine the small, incremental, but still significant inroads into the African American community in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, a difference of 3 or 4 points over Mitt Romney, some cases as many as 6, you understand that in a situation in which the president carried Wisconsin by, I believe, 10,000 votes, that every vote counted, and those minor incursions, plus a record turnout from rural areas that did not turn out for Mitt Romney or John McCain, plus a better showing in the cities made the difference. And it is a tribute to the hard work and the focus of our candidate that the victory was won. Donald Trump is his own man. He is his own creation. There is no Karl Rove in this story. There is no person feeding the president polling data and focus groups and round tables, because Donald Trump speaks from the heart. He speaks from the gut. He's not a polished career politician who is reading a speech written by some 25-year-old speechwriter. He knows where he stands. Now, it doesn't always come out right. Sure, he makes mistakes. He'd be the first to admit it. But that's what makes him genuine. That's what makes him authentic. That's what makes him real. And I think it was a major factor in his election. God bless you. God bless the United States. And God bless the
So we're going to give Mr. Stone about 10 minutes. If everyone can form a line at the back of the room. Bridget, very pretty lady up there at the front. She's going to get us all checked in and sign books. We'll be back in 10 minutes. Back of the room, please. Thank you.
Good job, Roger.
How are you? See you again.
James Gamble.
Yeah, good to see you again.
How you doing? 2 minutes on Joey.
Sure.
Roger Stone, what do you make of this business with Joey?